Thank you so much, Professor Halbertal. As always, I'm thinking a lot about your words in trust and how much Rabbi Sachs spoke about us having morality based on a collective and a community and having to really see each other in order to have a rooted humanism and go out there to make the world a better place. My name is Mijal. I'm the Rosh Kehilla of the Downtown Minyan. And I had the privilege with many people here downtown to really be able to learn from Rabbi Sachs in person when he was a professor at NYU here in Lower Manhattan. And I'll tell you that this past summer, as one of the projects of trying to commemorate and remember Rabbi Sachs, Rabbi Chaim Strauchler from Tradition magazine reached out to me. And he told me, you know, Mijal, we're trying to help everybody remember Rabbi Sachs' books and his ideas and his works. And one of the ways we're going to do so is with a project in which we assign different people who were his students books, not that Rabbi Sachs wrote, but that he quoted. And we want you to pick one of those books and summarize it and explain why it was important for Rabbi Sachs. So I looked at this long list. You can imagine the list of books that he gave me. I looked at this long list and immediately one book jumped out to me. It's called A Rumor of Angels by Peter Berger. And I love that book. I said, okay, I want to do this one. Peter Berger is a sociologist who studied religion. And unlike many other sociologists, he was also a religious person who wrote about his own faith. And this very slim volume that he wrote in 1969, I remembered vividly because I heard it quoted in many religious settings. What does Peter Berger say in this book? He says like this. He says, in an open and secular society, it is very difficult, almost impossible, to maintain religious faith. Why? Because you need certain sociological, epistemological structures in order to be able to be what he called a deviant, someone who goes against the rest of society in terms of believing in God and the supernatural. And so Peter Berger put there certain advice that I heard quoted in different places. And the advice was the following. People who want to retain their faith, what he called deviants, need to find other deviants, and then they need to huddle together. They need to create communities of fellow believers, and they need to be able to create communities in which they can maintain their faith. And I was curious, what's Rabbi Sachs going to write in relation to this? When I went to his writings and the different places in his books and in his Divrei Torah, in which he quoted this precise book, Peter Berger, I was surprised to see that he didn't write at all about this huddling together. Instead, he wrote about the second part of the book, in which Peter Berger writes, perhaps a little bit autobiographically, about what it means to not have that model of huddling together, but instead to be able to go out into the world, he was an academic, and to find the tools to maintain your faith and your commitments, even when you hold them by yourself and no one else holds them. And that's what Rabbi Sachs focused on. And I thought, wow, this is not mere coincidence. This is surprising, it's puzzling, but it actually tells us a lot about the project that Rabbi Sachs sought to represent. What Professor Halbertal called a rooted humanism, what Rabbi Sachs described as a Judaism engaged with the world. Rabbi Joe, you know, when you asked me to share some words here about the ideas of Rabbi Sachs's philosophy, I don't know if you realize, but I was a little bit resistant. I felt, you know, you grew up in England and you and your fellow English Jewish community got to see so much of Rabbi Sachs. And I felt that many of us downtown actually had an amazing and unique privilege in terms of being part of the American Jewish community, that we got to see him, that we got to spend time with him. Many of us got to have one-on-ones with him. We got to pray next to him. We got to spend Shabbat meals with him. We got to maybe walk with him in Washington Square Park and see his reactions to the fairs that are often before COVID there on Shabbat. And we got to really be able to experience being with him and learn from his principles and learn from his values, learn from his kindness. The way that even here when we had downtown VAD meetings, he made every single person, every single leader, every single community member feel seen and like our local problems really mattered, and like he could give us sage advice to think about them. And underlying this reality is the fact that he was a professor at NYU. And underlying that is the principle that he upheld, this idea of representing and embodying a Judaism that was engaged with the world. If I had my own imaginary conversation with Rabbi Sachs, and I would ask him, well, what do you think about Peter Berger's first recommendation, the huddling together? What would you say about that? After all, he was an Orthodox rabbi. After all, he was an ardent supporter of the state of Israel, perhaps the most potent experiment of Jews huddling together in the past 2,000 years. And I think Rabbi Sachs, I'm guessing Rabbi Sachs would say that what it means to have a Judaism engaged with the world, what it means to carry on this tradition, it does mean that we huddle together. It does mean that we huddle together in our communities, but that is not the destination. That is not the destination. That is a path to get us out there to the world, to get us to confront the most significant questions of modernity, the most significant questions facing our society, and to draw strength, wisdom, support, ethical concepts from our tradition, and to bring them with us. This is represented in every facet of his life and his works. From the books that he would quote, I mean, just look at the footnotes. He taught us to see evolutionary biology and economics and philosophy and so many other fields as fields that help us recognize even more wisdom within our tradition. And he taught us to use our tradition to find even more wisdom in Western philosophy and Western wisdom and all of the different modern ideas that we have around us. He taught us what it means to find people of good faith and goodwill everywhere and to partner with them, to think about what it means to stand shoulder to shoulder with the dignity of difference, celebrating the dignity of difference to confront the most significant problems before us. He taught us, he wrote, and I think about this so much, what it means to think about anti-Semitism and the dangers confronting us, and to resist retreating to despondency, resist huddling in a way that is only about fear, and instead think about finding allies and finding friends, engaging with the world, take advantage of the blessings of liberal democracy and pluralism, and have full confidence in our tradition and in ourselves, that we can not only meet the biggest questions of modernity, but we can answer them, and we can contribute to them, and we can make a difference both for ourselves and for the world at large. I think the most significant tool that Rabbi Sachs used, Peter Berger didn't have this in his book in the second part, but I think Rabbi Sachs' most significant tool that he used for this was really a sense of confidence, a sense of faith, faith in our ancestors, faith in what it means to be a link in a very powerful chain of people who came before us and who believed in the same tradition, faith in our text, in the wisdom literature that we inherited, in the fact that the biblical words of Genesis that we're reading right now can answer and address some of the most pressing questions before us. And faith, and this, I think all of us felt this when we spoke to him, really faith in each and every one of us, that we have not only the responsibility, but the absolute capacity to stand up to the occasion, to be rooted in our huddled communities, and then to take all of that, to go out there, engage with the world, and transform it. So I'll just end with a bracha that the Be'ezrat Hashem, that God willing, that we continue to be his students, that we take the words that he wrote. If we were lucky enough, that we take the memories that we have of having experienced being next to him, and that we use those as really a reminder for us of what it means to be part of this magnificent covenant that we've inherited, that can allow us to have so much confidence in who we are, and can allow us to dream of who we can be, and can allow us to engage with the world in order to transform it. So, Yehi Zichro Baruch. Good job.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Mijal Bitton. Thank you, Professor Halbertal. I want to conclude with something very simple and brief. Nothing deep. Something which will probably make people smile, I hope. I want to talk for just one moment, not about what Rabbi Sachs meant to the world, which was so much, not about what Rabbi Sachs meant to our own downtown Manhattan community, but what about our community, downtown Manhattan, meant to Rabbi Sachs. You hear the name Rabbi Sachs, chief rabbi. You hear the name Rabbi Sachs, global media Jewish superstar, the person who can pack a room anywhere around the globe. It's very exciting if you're part of the audience. I think it was extremely difficult difficult for him to play that role. I grew up in the UK. It was amazing to have him as chief rabbi, such a source of pride. He was constantly attacked from the left, attacked from the right, attacked from the Jewish media. Many times called for his resignation. When he'd walk into a place somewhere around the globe, hundreds of people there, everyone clamoring for him. Rabbi Sachs, and a lot of people who didn't know him so well don't understand this. He might have been a fantastic orator. He was extremely shy. What must it be like to walk into a room with thousands of people who are just waiting for you, and you've got to perform for them? These are things he struggled with, and these are things he overcame, and he overcame them wonderfully. But when he was in the UK, he wasn't someone who was able to be easily accessible, not someone who would spend lots of time with individuals, wasn't someone who could publicly relax. And I think we were very privileged here, thanks to a whole number of things. Ambient university setting, the Bronfman Center, the kind of atmosphere that Rabbi Sana and Rabbi Bellino create amongst the rabbis of downtown Manhattan. First time I saw him in New York, Rabbi Sana said to me, we're going to have a meeting of the downtown VAD. It's in a sports bar called Promenade on 23rd Street. The Israeli owner, he's just made all the wines kosher there. I thought, you've got to be joking. Like, I just arrived in New York. I was still jet lagged. Rabbi Sachs doesn't go to sports bars. There he was, hundreds of people in the bar, music pounding, 100 screens. And he's at the back, suit and tie, having sushi, having whiskey, having a great time. Purim, every year. He was in our wonderfully silly Bronfman Center Purim spiel, playing his role. And maybe most movingly, every semester he would give me a day from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. where he would spend the whole day, 20-minute slots back to back, meeting with any student who would want to meet with him. It was the email that I would send to the community every year, which would get by far the biggest, by far the quickest response. Orthodox, conservative, reform, newly religious, no longer religious, political people, academics, Syrian students. They loved him more than anyone else. They had a sense of malchut. And he'd walk around Washington Square Park with me at lunch, and he'd say, this person told me this, and I think you should know about that, and this one inspired me. And Joanna, his office head, and Lady Elaine would tell me, far more than speaking to 1,000 people at the 92nd Street Y, far more than the lunch with the ambassador at the prestigious DC think tank. That day, he would spend one-on-one with students, listening to them, hearing their stories. That meant more to him than anything else. He'd always tell the story of when he was an undergraduate at Cambridge, how he came to America summer after the 1967 war, wondering about his path, and how he met with Rav Soloveitchik, and he met with the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and they spoke to him in ways which set him on his path. And this was his inspiring story he would always tell. Tell that more than any other. And he won't ever tell that story again. But I know that our community, its oldest members to its youngest members, its synagogues, its students, provided him with the opportunity where he knew that he could connect in a way with people one-on-one, in a way in which being Chief Rabbi of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth, and the way in which having tens of thousands of views for every video on Facebook never ever could have that personal impact. We should all be very grateful, exceedingly grateful, that we played that role in the last decade of his life, that he was able to have that satisfaction, that nachat ruach. The halacha, the tradition is that after we've shared Torah, we say Kaddish de Rabbanan. We've heard some wonderful Torah tonight. We've learned some wonderful Torah tonight. I'll say Kaddish de Rabbanan, and anyone else who is also saying Kaddish should join with me. And we'll have in our minds that Rabbi Sachs's neshama should have an aliyah, should continue to inspire people. Rabbi Chananya ben Akash Omer Ratzah HaKadosh Baruch Hu L'Zachat Yisrael Pi Katev Lehem Torah Mitzvot Shene'amar Anai Chafetz Leman Tzipor Yedim Torah V'Yavim. Yikdash Shmei Rabba Ve'amad Yivrach Tirutei V'yamrit Marusei V'chai Echon V'yom Echon V'chai B'chol Beit Yisrael Ba'agala U'bizman Kariv V'yivru Amen. Anei Shmei Rabba Mevorach Le'olam Lo Maya Yitbarach V'yishbach V'yipa'ar V'yitumam V'yinasei V'yizadar V'yitarej V'yitala Shmei V'kudsha V'richu Le'ela Min Kol Birchata V'shirata V'shpachata V'nechmata V'amiran V'almar V'yivru Amen. Al Yisrael V'al Rabbanan V'al Talmidei Hon V'al Kol Talmidei Hon V'al Kol Man V'askim B'oraita Tivach V'hadei V'ti B'chol Atar V'yatar Yehei L'hol L'kom Shlam V'rach V'afin V'tis V'rachamim V'chayin V'yitchet V'zonim V'yitchet V'kana Mikad HaMa'aram V'shnaya V'yivru Amen. Yehei Shnam Rav Min Shemaya V'chaim Tovim Aleinu Al Kol Yisrael V'yivru Amen. Shalom V'yaseh Shalom Aleinu Al Kol Yisrael V'yivru Amen.